Senator from Utah.
Madam President, I ask that my remarks be as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Okay. Madam President, the Senate has so far this year confirmed 26 judicial nominees, including 6 appeals court nominees. The majority was right on cue, complaining about what they still insist is unprecedented confirmation obstruction and threatening to fundamentally change the confirmation process itself. The late Senator from New York, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, once said that you are entitled to your own opinion but not to your own facts. So let's look at the real confirmation facts. The Senate confirmed a higher percentage of President Obama's first-term appeals court nominees and did so faster than it had for President Bush. The 111 judges confirmed in the previous Congress was the highest total in more than 20 years. Now, we are at the beginning of President Obama's second term. The Senate is on a faster second-term confirmation pace than under any president in American history. And by the way, we have already confirmed more judges as the Democratic majority allowed to be confirmed in all of 2005, the first year of President Bush's second term. I was chairman of the Judiciary Committee, and we moved those judges through when there were Democrat presidents, and we're moving them through with this Democrat president. Or we can look specifically at nominees to the U.S. Court of Appeals. The 6 appeals court nominees already confirmed this year are more than 60% above the average annual confirmation pace during the entire time that I've been in the Senate. I've only been here 37 years, but this is 60% above the average annual confirmation pace during the entire time I've been in the U.S. Senate. In fact, the Senate confirmed more appeals court nominees by this time in only 8 of those 37 years that I've been here. Despite those confirmation facts, the majority wants the public to believe that legions of judicial nominees are piling up, waiting to be confirmed, and that the only thing holding back this confirmation flood is Republican obstruction in general and Republican filibusters in particular. Democratic senators claim that there have been hundreds of filibusters. In January 2011, they claimed that there had been 275 filibusters in the previous 4 years alone. Last December, the claim had risen to 391. My Democratic colleagues would be no less accurate if they claimed thousands or even millions of filibusters. There's no other way to say it, Mr. President, but the majority is committing filibuster fraud, and it's pathetic. Here's how they do it. The Senate must end debate on a bill or a nomination before we can vote on it. The process for ending debate or invoking cloture has 2 steps, a cloture motion and a cloture vote. A cloture motion is nothing more than a request to end debate and requires only the signature of 16 senators. The little secret behind those wild claims of filibusters in the hundreds is that Democrats are counting cloture motions, not filibusters, most of which they filed. On January 1st of this year, one Democratic senator actually let slip what the majority is up to when he referred to, quote, the use of the filibuster as measured by the number of cloture motions, unquote. Cloture motions and filibusters are 2 different things. In a report dated just last month, the Congressional Research Service says that, quote, Senate leadership has increasingly made use of cloture at times when no evident filibuster has yet occurred, unquote. The current majority leader, now that was the Congressional Research Service that said that. The current majority leader files cloture motions left and right, sometimes at the same time and in virtually the same breath as when he brings up a matter for consideration. That gimmick boosts the number that the majority uses as false evidence of a filibuster problem, but it is simply filibuster fraud. So many of these cloture motions are unnecessary that a higher percentage is withdrawn without any cloture vote at all than under previous majority leaders of either party. Here's one recent example. The Judiciary Committee unanimously reported the appeals court nomination of Sri Srinivasan on May 16, 2013. I helped to get him through the Judiciary Committee. No one opposed this nominee in the Judiciary Committee, and no one was ever going to oppose this nominee on the floor. The majority leader still filed a cloture motion, even though the minority leader had already agreed to a confirmation vote. I will not be surprised if the majority claims that this unanimously confirmed nominee was somehow filibustered because a completely unwarranted and totally unnecessary cloture motion was filed and promptly withdrawn. It is time to stop the gimmicks and fake numbers. It is time to stop the filibuster fraud. A cloture motion is simply a request to end debate, while a cloture vote is an actual attempt to end debate. A filibuster occurs when that attempt to end debate fails. Let's look specifically at judicial filibusters. The majority should know the judicial filibuster facts because, after all, they pioneered the use of filibusters to defeat judicial nominees who would otherwise be confirmed. Let me just refer to this chart right here. The Democrats are the large red line, and the Republicans are the smaller one. The Senate has taken a total of 51 cloture votes on 36 different judicial nominations since the first one in 1968. Remember that a vote against cloture is a vote for a filibuster. As this chart shows, 79% of all votes by senators for judicial filibusters in American history have been cast by Democrats. One reason why the majority uses fake definition and made-up numbers is that the number of real judicial filibusters is much lower today than in the past, especially during the previous administration of George W. Bush. Here's another chart. The red line is votes taken. The green line are the votes that failed. The large lines on the left are during the time of George W. Bush, and the short lines are during the time of Obama. At this point, under President Bush, the Senate had taken 24 cloture votes on judicial nominees, and 20 of them had failed. In other words, there had been 20 judicial filibusters by Democrats. Not cloture motions, but actual filibusters that prevented confirmation votes. But under President Obama, the Senate has taken only 9 cloture votes on judicial nominees, and only 4 of those have failed. There have been only 4 judicial filibusters since President Obama took office. It's no wonder that the majority today would rather use fake numbers than talk about real filibusters, and then threaten to have a nuclear option. That's ridiculous. And I can tell you it's a dangerous thing for Democrats to do. I admit there are a lot of Democrats that are here for the first time, have never been in the minority, but they better think it through. Democrats led 5 times as many filibusters of President Bush's judicial nominees than there have been filibusters of President Obama's judicial nominees. 5 times as many. Not only that, but the very same majority party leaders who today most loudly condemn judicial filibusters, the majority leader, the majority whip, and the Judiciary Committee chairman each voted no less than 21 times for judicial filibusters by this point under President Bush. They voted for real filibusters then. They condemn fake filibusters today. Another example of filibuster fraud is the claim that the Senate today is bound by a 2006 agreement among a group of senators who came to be known as the Gang of 14. Just a few months ago, the majority whip said that the Senate is supposed to use this agreement today as the standard for justifying a filibuster. In the Judiciary Committee and here on the floor, senators on the other side of the aisle lecture us about how we supposedly have violated that agreement. That agreement was never binding on more than those 14 senators. It offered a standard that was to be interpreted and applied individually, and it never applied to anyone after 2006. Here's what happened. By the spring of 2005, Democrats had led 20 filibusters that prevented confirmation votes on 10 different appeals court nominees. The majority leader threatened to prevent judicial filibusters through a parliamentary ruling that could be sustained by a simple majority vote. A group of 7 Democrats and 7 Republicans joined to head off that confrontation. With a 55-45 Republican majority, the 7 Democrats were enough to prevent judicial filibusters, and the 7 Republicans were enough to prevent a ban on judicial filibusters. I have here, right here, the Memorandum of Understanding signed by those 14 senators. 3 things stand out. First, it says that it, quote, confirms an understanding among the signatories, unquote. The agreement applied only to those 14 senators, only 5 of whom are serving today. Second, it says that this agreement is, quote, related to spending and future nominations in the 109th Congress, unquote. In other words, it was related only to that Congress. The agreement expired more than 6 years ago. Third, it says that those 14 senators will support judicial filibusters only under, quote, extraordinary circumstances, unquote, and that each senator decides individually whether those circumstances exist. There never was any objective standard that applied to the Senate as a whole, or to any group of senators for that matter. It could not be clearer. This was an agreement among those senators to use that standard during that Congress in order to avoid that confrontation over changing confirmation procedures. Individual senators may certainly use whatever standard they choose for their cloture or confirmation votes, including whatever this extraordinary circumstances standard might mean. But it is pure fiction to say that this temporary agreement ever bound, let alone binds us today, more than those senators who explicitly agreed to it, most of whom are gone now. Today we have the bizarre phenomenon of Democratic senators who voted for nearly 24 filibusters of Bush nominees, telling us that an expired agreement that they had never joined somehow prevents us from voting for filibusters of Obama nominees today. Why is the majority using such sleight of hand and trying to enforce non-existent agreements? Why are they engaging in filibuster fraud? It's a big question. One possibility is that the majority wants to cover up the fact that President Obama has consistently lagged behind his predecessors in making judicial nominations. Consistently lagged behind. The Senate, after all, cannot confirm nominations that do not exist. Now, the administrative office of the courts tracks pending nominees for current judicial vacancies. You can see here the record based on that data. The first one is President Clinton on the left, then George W. Bush, then Obama, and then today. And as you can see, Obama's way below Clinton and Bush. You can see here the record based on that data. That's the data of the Administrative Office of the U.S. Courts. The Senate had pending nominations for an average of 41% of current vacancies under President Clinton, 53% under President Bush, but only 35% under President Obama. And today it is even lower at only 33%. During his first term, President Obama was more than 30% behind President Bush's nominations pace, but ended up only 10% behind in total confirmations. That hardly looks like a partisan obstruction to me. Not all vacancies, of course, are created equal. Some are more pressing than others. President Obama recently sent to the Senate nominees for the 3 remaining vacancies on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit. And the majority is demanding, the Democrats over here are demanding swift confirmation. By the Democrats' own standards, however, these nominees should not even be considered. In 2006, Judiciary Committee Democrats wrote then-Chairman Arlen Specter to oppose considering a D.C. Circuit nominee. That letter, which I have here, said that another D.C. Circuit nominee, quote, should under no circumstances be considered, much less confirmed before we first address the very need for that judgeship and deal with the genuine judicial emergencies identified by the Judicial Conference. That's an interesting letter. And it was signed by a number of the Democrats. I ask that both of these documents be placed in the record.
Without
the
objection.
appropriate places.
Without objection.
My Democratic colleagues had two criteria for filling a D.C. Circuit vacancy. The need for the judgeship to be filled had to be established, and particularly pressing vacancies elsewhere had to be addressed. Let's apply those Democratic criteria to these new D.C. Circuit nominees. The first Democratic standard is that there must clearly be a need for the particular judgeship to be filled. In 2006, Democrats offered specific criteria, including the total number of appeals filed. Now, as you can see here, based on the most recent data from the Judiciary's Administrative Office, the number of appeals filed, shown here in green, has been below the 2006 level every year since, and far below the average of all circuits across the country, shown here in red. As you can see, the appeals filed for the year ending, the green happens to be the D.C. Circuit, and the red happens to be the circuit average. Another Democratic benchmark is the number of appeals resolved on the merits per active judge. Based on the same data from the Judiciary's Administrative Office, even with a lower number of active judges, this benchmark has risen a mere 4% from 2006. Whether you look at new cases or completed cases, judges on the D.C. Circuit handle about 40% fewer cases than judges on the next busiest circuit. Based on these Democratic benchmarks, these D.C. Circuit vacancies do not need to be filled. There's hypocrisy here. The second Democratic standard for considering D.C. Circuit nominees is that more pressing vacancies designated judicial emergencies should first be addressed. Vacancies get that label the older they are and the heavier a court's caseload. Now here we have again judicial emergency vacancies and nominees. The red is judicial emergencies, the green happens to be judicial nominees. As you can see, judicial emergencies are off the charts in this administration. And yet he's going to put 3 people on the D.C. Circuit that doesn't need them, where they're not justified, in spite of the comments of our Democratic friends back in 2006 and thereafter? Give me a break. The contrast between 2006 and today is really dramatic. When Democrats in July 2006 rejected consideration of a single D.C. Circuit nominee, President Bush had made nominations for 12 of the 20 existing judicial emergencies. Now, when Democrats demand consideration of not 1 but 3 D.C. Circuit nominees, President Obama has sent us nominees for only 8 of the 30 judicial emergencies that exist today. So the D.C. Circuit's caseload is down, while judicial emergencies without nominees are up. I'm not accusing my colleagues in the majority of flip-flopping because their party controls the White House, but it seems to me that their own criteria clearly compel the conclusion that these new D.C. Circuit nominees should not be considered at this time. The second reason for the majority's filibuster fraud is that they want to manufacture some justification, even if they have to make it up out of thin air, for eliminating judicial filibusters. They want to do today exactly what the Gang of 14 prevented in 2006, but with far less justification. And I don't think there was much justification then either, but far less today. The minority leader, Senator McConnell, has daily reminded us of the majority leader's explicit promise not to pursue changing confirmation procedures except through the steps provided for in our standing rules. In addition, if we look at the facts rather than the fiction, there is no conceivable reason to pursue such a change by any means. There have been far fewer judicial filibusters today, 1/5 as many, than during the Bush administration. There is less justification to change confirmation procedures today than there was when Democrats opposed doing so in 2006. Let me summarize this journey through the real world of judicial confirmations. There is a very real, very serious debate about the kind of judges America needs on the federal bench. The process of considering President Obama's judicial nominees, however, is being conducted reasonably and fairly. The majority apparently will do anything, even engaging in filibuster fraud, to avoid admitting the facts while hoping that no one will be the wiser. The truth is that filibusters are down, not up, and that there have been far fewer judicial filibusters of Obama nominees than there were of Bush nominees. The D.C. Circuit's caseload is down, while the number of judicial emergencies without nominees is up. There is a better course than provoking unnecessary confrontations by nominees to positions that should not even exist, or by threatening to change confirmation procedures that should not be changed. The majority should abandon their strategy of filibuster fraud and prioritize filling the most pressing vacancies. All I can say is that it's time to be real about these things and quit playing politics with the judges in this country. I think I have a reputation that allows me to speak on these matters because I've worked so hard to try and fill the judicial vacancies throughout the years that I've served on the Judiciary Committee, 37 years now. And I believe in the federal judges in this country and in the federal judiciary. And I believe we ought to pick the highest quality people and not worry about so much about their ideology as we do about doing justice for the American people under the law. That, to me, is what we should be concentrating on instead of political advantage in hypocritical ways. Madam President, I suggest the absence of quorum.